So next up, it's my absolute pleasure to chat about regulation, which might seem like a very dry subject, but unfortunately it is very important, and it's becoming increasingly important. So I'd like to invite to the stage my three panelists. I'll start with Fatemeh. Thank you very much. Round of applause. Woo! I'll sit here if you want to go. Then Marina. Woo! And Menno. So again, we all know the Slido. I am going to get rid of the previous questions. Now, thank you all for coming, and welcome to ETHDam in Amsterdam. I know you've been here before. I don't know about the other two. Have you been? Oh.
Yeah, I have been. I am actually born and raised in Amsterdam, so
perfect.
You got yourself there.
And you, Fatemeh?
Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Is it working? Yeah, I have been to Amsterdam, and I'm really glad to be here today.
Cool. Well, I hope you enjoy it later on this evening. So to start, it would be great if each of you could just give a very quick introduction of yourself and also what you do around regulation and kind of what's your interest in it.
Sure, I'll start. So, Menno Martens, so it's nice to see you all here being excited about privacy and DeFi. So I worked at a central bank, the Dutch central bank, as a policy advisor on crypto. This was great, and it was a very valuable experience because I got to work on, for example, stuff like the digital euro and on MiCA that's upcoming next year. So I feel like I have a lot of insights here to share with you. And now I'm working at the global asset manager VanEck. I'm product manager of the crypto ETNs here in Europe, and also working as crypto specialist just as in Europe to kind of spread my knowledge with my colleagues and go to events like this.
Cool, thank you.
My name is Marina. I'm a lawyer, co-founder and director of the European Crypto Initiative, which is a non-profit organization based in Brussels. It's an advocacy group. So we talk to EU regulators about anything that might affect crypto. We've been here for a few years. We worked on the markets and crypto assets regulation. And right now, the big topic is AML. There's a whole AML package that has been currently discussed in the trilogues. So I'll talk about this too.
And my name is Fatemeh. I am a criminal defense, white-collar crime defense lawyer, and crypto and privacy advocate and counsel. And I advise several of the privacy projects within crypto.
Cool, thanks a lot. Which is a perfect segue into the first question, which is around the fact that we all know that Alexey has recently been detained here in the Netherlands thanks to his involvement in Tornado Cash. And I'd like to hear all of your thoughts on the ongoing case.
Yeah, I'll start. So just right off the bat, like as manager, we are, of course, a regulated company. So we know all about regulation and compliance, unfortunately. That's just the reality of it. So we are pro-regulation. That's not, to say that there hasn't been any injustice done in Alexey's case. I actually really liked Keith's example on this analogy where you kind of compare, like, well, I used the curtain manufacturer and the one who uses the curtain, which is, a lot like using privacy tools on Ethereum. And you have to ask yourself, like, is the curtain manufacturer, like, doing anything bad, really? It's really, like, a hard question to ask, and at the same time, is the one who uses the curtains someone who is, like, automatically a bad person? And this is, like, really hard. But what I'm primarily, like, looking at in my role right now is where do things like AML or privacy overlap each other, and how can we create privacy tools that kind of still benefit both? And this is something that is really interesting to me. Yeah.
find, first of all, what happened with the arrest and the proceedings that are current right now very unfortunate. This is extremely sad, actually, to see that happening in Europe right now, and also because we had so little access to information, like throughout all these many months. Like as a community, we didn't know also how to react. So I'm very glad that despite also the sanctions against Tornado Cash, people kept on using it. I mean, the sanctions were only in the US, but nonetheless, like Europeans, for instance, were still allowed to use it and kept on using it, which also like fed in the defense of Alexey as not being a key person within Tornado Cash because it was still being used afterwards. I feel like I want to just emphasize that the opening talk at this conference this morning from Alexei's counsel was, to me, maybe the most important like crypto privacy legal talk ever given in a conference, because it gave very practical, basically, tools for anybody building in the space to know what would any defense look like, and what are basically all of the narratives and evidences that you would need in order to prepare that defense. And if we can work ahead of time on all of these points, then there would be way less grounds to worry about it.
I would like to continue from where you started. This talk this morning was, in a way, using legal arguments, but most of them were based on the technical aspect. So we found this very, very important, and it's a part of our everyday job to explain why this tech is different, why it works in a specific way. And it's, in a way, really hard, because there's a very limited time that the regulators have to understand it. We're talking to different regulators for different regulations, different documents. And at the same time, I think this is the only way how we can make, in a way, a better understanding of how this works and how, again, it is different from what we are used from before. There are so many examples that I can now talk about, but maybe later in this discussion. It's about regulation of smart contracts, is understanding what is decentralized, it's understanding what is privacy. It's just, I think more and more efforts need to be put into, in a way, educating how this tech works.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And I actually want to give another round of applause to Mr. Chang there for the presentation this morning. So that's where a lot of the upcoming regulation really seems to overlap and discuss a lot of the AML, the anti-money laundering, which is fundamentally on the surface against privacy, because they're trying to understand all of the different actors and really what everyone's doing to protect against money laundering. So I'm interested to hear from each of you, really, how do you view this balance of privacy and being anti-money laundering?
So what's interesting is that, in the traditional financial world, people actually love privacy and confidentiality, especially of trade secrets. And, so the only difference is that, there's the regulator who always has a view into everything. And in DeFi and privacy, this might not always be the case. And what's even more interesting, I have a lot of experience trying to, explain regulators and policy makers how smart contracts work, how decentralization works, and they really fail to understand it sometimes, that you can't just control the smart contract that's already deployed. You can't just change the code. You can't just control who accesses the code. So, yeah, it's a really, really hard challenge, especially when AML comes into the view. How do you deal with this? And I think an interesting venue would be going into introducing things like social consensus in protocols, where you can still try to, through decentralization, control who can access the protocol and who can't access the protocol. if you, of course, have got some kind of proof that this user is a bad actor. But how do you label a bad actor? How do you find that proof? These are all challenges that we should be, that you guys should be working on to make DeFi a safer space, because bad actors will exist as long as there's money to be made, unfortunately. And if we want to keep our own users safe, then we need to work on this really well, especially if we want the rest of the world to adopt this technology.
From my point, I think what's important is that from the beginning of this ecosystem, the regulators have not reacted immediately. So they said, okay, let's look at what's been built, let's see what this is, and then we'll think about it a little bit later. So right now, they have made the decision to regulate this space. That is very, very clear. It's clear because it's coming from the EU, it's coming from the US, and also from the international organizations. So we're talking about privacy right now. And I mean, privacy has been debated on many different levels. We have the FATF deciding what privacy is and what AML is. We have all the national, in a way, ministries, organizations, governments deciding what privacy is. And I think you mentioned before the digital euro. This is going to be a very important experiment for Europe, and to see where and how the creators of the digital euro think about privacy. And it's in a way surprising, because what they're saying is that in a way anonymity is an absolute term, but privacy is not absolute term. So the most important thing is in a way to be compliant with AML rules. And I think that what is very interesting for our work daily is how we see that the rules when it comes to AML are different when it comes to, compared to, let's say, crypto or the digital euro. We are saying this is digital money, so it's much easier to, in a way, send it from one person to the other versus cash. And so what we are seeing right now in these trialogues where we are negotiating the AML package is that, in general, when it comes to crypto, we have more stricter rules than the ones that we're used to when it comes to cash. So the thresholds are lower, there's more, in a way, checks in between. And our work, in a way, is to argue that we need to have at least the same level of privacy that we have with cash. And we'll see how this will turn out. I think we have another, probably a year or a little bit less, to see what the final documents on this will say in Europe.
I mean, I personally question the whole legitimacy and efficiency of the KYC AML regulations that exist right now, and also the legitimacy of FATF or FATF as like the most maybe important body setting these like standards and regulations in the space, in the financial space. But the thing is that like we have to also be clear that we are fighting against regulation that is unfit for purpose, because I mean all the KYC rules do is make more expensive for criminals to do whatever they want to do, although they still do it, but they just have to come up with more sophisticated structures. So in the end, it does not necessarily address the point other than add this kind of hidden tax for what they consider being bad actors. I feel like there are many kind of technological equivalents that we can innovate and create that would attain the same purpose of excluding these bad actors that are not like KYC based, or that are not like using the same mechanisms that are right now in vogue in the financial space. And but the problem is that we are facing an industry, a very, very big industry. So all the KYC providers, this is a lot of money they are getting. Obviously, they want to protect their industry. All of the banks, all of the financial intermediaries have processes in place that are very costly. So anything that we come up with would mean that all of these may become obsolete later. So there are also all of these other factors that come into play when regulation basically pushes, or when people lobby for a certain type of regulations that privacy tech may not be willing to tailor for. Nonetheless, I agree with everything that was said in the previous panel in terms of privacy tech is the future. I think there is no way around it. Once the tech is mature and usable on a daily basis. Like, why would anybody not use privacy tech? So the only kind of pain point right now is that it's not, for instance, it's not on the Ethereum blockchain level. But once it's adopted by all of the networks and protocols, then there is really no way around it, and other people will have to adjust and find other type of mechanisms. I would just want to answer briefly to the arguments that was made before, that like the tech is decentralized and we cannot stop it, and we cannot stop or control the smart contracts and so on. This is an argument that we all use. This is infrastructure, so it's a tool. We cannot interfere with it, so we are not responsible. I think this is a very delicate argument to make, especially if it becomes case law at some point, because they can just force you ahead of time not to design anything that you cannot control. And this obviously would be very, very bad for everyone. So we have to also be very careful about what points we put forward. And if we put such a point, which is a legitimate one, then we have to kind of argue for it in a way that they understand and they want to maintain it.
Maybe I will just take a minute after that, again, comment. There is an example of the thing that just what Fatemeh explained. A Data Act regulation that has been postponed in the EU is regulating smart contracts in the Article 30. And it says that smart contracts need to be stoppable, they need to have a kill switch. They even say we need to be able to reset smart contracts. So it is used for specific cases of data sharing, but it is something that we have written a position paper on. We had 19 other organizations signing and supporting this, and we still have, I would say, not understanding or not willingness to change this in the EU. And I think that we're talking about MiCA, we're talking about a financial regulation, but then we have something that is so like small and didn't bring a lot of attention, but we are in a way regulating and limiting the core of what we are using here in the space. And yeah, that's very, very important, because they can come up with rules where you're saying, in first place, you are not allowed to design tools like that. And wherever you do it, it's not going to be compliant with any of those regulations that are coming up from now on.
We don't want that. Sounds bad. Regulation generally is perceived as negative and has traditionally been perceived as negative. But I'm interested to see, as it's developing, is there actually something that is exciting about regulation? Kind of what do you think it's going to enable in the crypto space?
I think I shared this with you guys already yesterday, but something that I came across is that actually, whether or not it's because of regulation that's upcoming in Europe, Europe actually has the most amount of crypto-friendly banks right now. This is, of course, partly due to whatever is happening in the US. And we've also seen that the number of VC investments in Q1 to 2023 was more than anywhere else in the world. So Europe has had the highest amounts of VC investments, and I think this is partly due to upcoming MiCA regulation. And this touches like an interesting point, because I don't know if you guys are familiar with the concept of like the Brussels effect. So this kind of explains that Europe somehow seems to control the rest of the world through regulation, and any company outside of Europe that wants to target the European market will somehow indirectly comply with the regulation in Europe. So we'll see that like MiCA will like form the basis of pretty much every other regulation that's gonna come into force outside of Europe. So I think, you know, there's a lesson to take here, is that we should look at MiCA and try to understand it in every detail possible if you're working on a project right now and you're planning to launch in the upcoming years. And try to just understand it and see how you can comply with this regulation, because it's going to give you a competitive advantage compared to those who don't.
It's really refreshing to hear a European-centric take, because usually it's like very US-centric. and thinking that Europe sets the legal standard for the world. I mean, if it's a good standard, then maybe why not? But another reason I think that there is so many investments in Europe compared to everywhere else right now is actually the regulatory confused state of the United States, right? So everyone is so afraid with projects having a connection or like a nexus to the US of any form of enforcement by the SEC and so on, that if a project is non-US, then it can attract money more easily, and VCs prefer to invest through an European arm.
A very exciting thing about regulation in Europe was a part of the markets in crypto assets regulation and the decision of the regulators to create a completely new asset class that was called crypto assets. So as Fatemeh said, there is confusion in the US, should the token be a security or utility? And here we didn't have this, in a way, decisions. We just came up with a new asset class. There's a completely new one, never existed before, and it's regulated in a way that it is regulated, but it's regulated not as strict as, for example, a financial instrument, as we call securities in the EU. So I think this is a very good approach. It's, in a way, very similar to what we have seen in the past in Switzerland, but it's very, very important because we have acknowledged that these crypto assets are different from what we have known before, and they need a specific way of being regulated. And again, I hope this is something that others will follow through the Brussels effect, but there's going to be definitely a lot of debate in the future.
Cool. In like 5 minutes or so, I'm going to go to the Slido questions. So if you do have any questions, please make sure to put them in the Slido. My last big question, which follows on from the regulation, is how do you think both traditional companies as well as crypto projects prepare for the MiCA regulation? Come to the EU, it's great.
So for traditional companies, it's going to be a lot easier because they already spent a lot of time and money on compliance and regulation, like auditing, reporting, accounting standards, etc. So this is something new that will be for like the crypto-based, crypto-native companies. I would say already start practicing, maybe even just do just practice rounds before this MiCA regulation comes into force. But maybe more important is that you'll get a lot of time to implement regulation into your project, compliance into your project. So there's plenty of time to look at how you can do that.
That's a good point. So the MiCA regulation has been issued first as a draft in 2020. So today is 2023. In a year, the part that talks about stablecoins is going to be applicable, so July 2024. And the end of 2024 or beginning of 2025, the other parts of MiCA is going to be applicable. They are talking about crypto as a service providers and the issuance of crypto assets. So there is still some time. Even in 2020, I think the draft is maybe changed 30%, 20%. So we had 3 years to read the document and kind of predict what could happen. But at the same time, there's a lot of unclarities. We are waiting for the two agencies, the European Banking Authority and the European Securities Market Agency, to give us more clarity through technical standards and guidance to very specific questions, like, for example, what is an NFT? Where is the limitation when something is an NFT, when it is regulated? More clarity on stablecoin regulation. I think this is going to be very, very important for all of us, and even looking into potentially delisting non-regulated stablecoins. So what would that mean for the European Union market? What did it mean for all the applications built on top of those, in a way, stablecoins or using stablecoins? I was talking to a few exchanges. They still have a lot of questions, and those questions will be hopefully answered as soon as possible from ESMA. But I think that it's something that never happened before in this space, and we will have a very detailed, like very, I would say, comprehensive regulation. And I would say this space, at least in Europe, will change with it for sure.
I'm a Swiss lawyer, so I can't really comment on MiCA, but I just want to say a lot of lobbying went into making MiCA something that is praisable right now, and people talk positively about it. And most of the, I think, important lobbying was done by Marina here and her organization. And like this organization, Marina, are lobbyists, if I can say, and researchers that truly believe in decentralization and crypto and whatever we're doing and building, and really advocate on behalf of the industry, which is extremely rare in terms of people who go lobbying and kind of interface with the regulators. So I just wanted to thank you, Marina, for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marina. Cool.
Maybe I can just add like 3 things. So I don't want to make it about MiCA or anything, but so the first thing about MiCA is that it had 3 goals, I think. The first goal is maybe not their intention, but it might be the end goal. Is Europe kind of lost Web 2, and they're trying to make Web 3 the European thing here. The second thing is they're trying to protect the euro through the regulation, and the third thing is that they're trying to protect investors. So actually, you know, there are some wins and losses with this regulation, but I think it's mostly good because I think there are a lot of like big institutions waiting on the sidelines to get their hands dirty with crypto. So this is a big opportunity for European companies, and I would say take that chance.
Cool, thank you. So on to the Slido questions. One is directed at you, Marina, asking if you could repeat your point about mandatory control of contracts. I think that was around the kill switch, maybe. Yeah, someone had a pass error in their brain, so.
Okay. Yeah, there's been, this Data Act is currently debated within the trilogue, so that means that all 3 institutions are discussing about it. It's not final yet, but what we have seen written in those different drafts is that when smart contracts are used for data sharing, they have a specific way of how they need to be designed. And usually, I mean, what's written there is that, yes, they should be stoppable, they should be designed in a way that they give access to someone. We don't know specifically who, probably the public authorities. Even in certain parts, the parliament version, for example, says that they need to be able to protect trade secrets, as you mentioned before, and they need to be compliant with other contracts, usually the legal agreements that we know. So it's really like, it really shows very clearly the misunderstanding of what a smart contract is. There was even our thought that maybe they use a smart contract in a different way. As you know, years ago there was a popular the industry 4.0 smart devices, smart contracts were popular, so we were thinking maybe they're using the term in this sense, so it could be a digital contract and then it would make sense. But I don't think they did. So I think they did want to capture the in a way blockchain part in. And I find it very hard to be compliant with this Article 30, except if you're not, for example, using private blockchain, or if you're just like using a specific smart contract standard for whatever applications you're building. And I think it also limits the use of like open source tech and, you know, exchanging knowledge through open source. So that's, yeah, quite concerning.
Cool, thank you for sharing. The next question is an honest question framed as the following. Do the authorities know that the AML rules that we have today in the fiat system do not really work, and with little willpower they are actually bypassed?
I can go. I think it's very important to distinguish 2 ways of how regulators think. One is maybe they really do not understand specific things and they didn't want to regulate it in this way, so it was basically almost a mistake. So we can argue, explain, and then the outcome would be different. In certain parts, they do understand it, and they still want to go on and regulate it as they want. So I think in this part, we are caught in this AML, way of how we are fighting, in a way, terrorist financing, etc. That is like Fatemeh explained here from years and years, and it's really hard to change and to revolutionize the way how we are doing this. And of course, we have new tech, and we could propose this new tech, but I think the window we have, the window of opportunity to propose new technologies and to propose new ways of how to regulate crypto is kind of closing, just because they're getting more and more detail into those regulations on copying what existed before. And once the regulation is finalized, it's not going to change for years after that, at least not in Europe.
One thing, though, is that either Tornado Cash compliance tool or privacy pools or any other project that kind of tries to build in some form of kind of AML tool is really important, because that communicates our intention to fight against money laundering through our own kind of ways, and that can be sold to the regulators. So I think that they are just stuck in whatever they know best, and there are so many dependencies around it that it's very hard to see outside what is possible, and especially because they have no knowledge of what we can build and what crypto and privacy tech enables. So if we can build more of those and then just approach them, I think, I wouldn't see, they may be stubborn, but they are not entirely irrational, and in the end, they serve their constituency. So if there are anything that we can go with to them, I don't see why we cannot try and maybe find common ground.
Cool, thank you. Could you tell us one good thing and one bad thing about Mika, a little bit quick fire?
So I think one good thing is that it brings a lot of clarity. If you're somewhere based in Europe and Mika comes into force, basically it allows you to passport your service or product anywhere in Europe, because it's like a uniformity of the European Union. So that's a big advantage. It gives a lot of just clarity about what you can and what you can't do. And maybe one bad thing would be that it does regulate the space. It does imply some limits. You need to have a white paper. You need to issue or launch your project 1 year after the white paper is published, stuff like this. So that there are some requirements to what you can do, but maybe those things are actually also good in a way.
The good thing is the exclusion of DeFi and decentralized organizations, and the bad thing is a limitation of the use of non-euro denominated stablecoins for payments to 200 million per day. And if this limit has been exceeded, the MiCA says the issuer for stablecoins should stop issuing stablecoins. So I leave you with this.
Good thing is that it moves the needle away from the US. Bad thing is it's just more regulation.
The last question that I have here, and I'm interested in also the Swiss take on this, because I believe it's already there, is what happens if we put traditional assets, aka securities, on chain now with Mika? But maybe you can share the Swiss, because I believe it's already completely legal there.
You can put securities on chain, but you still need to follow securities regulations, right? So if it is a security, then you can have the ledger basically being on a blockchain, and that's possible in Switzerland, but that doesn't spare you from complying with any kind of traditional securities regulations.
That's actually something that is not regulated by MiCA. MiCA doesn't regulate financial instruments or securities. We have this in MiFID already, but there is a new law that is called the DLT pilot regime, which basically defines the rules on how you can put securities on the blockchain. And this is already finalized. There are going to be few companies using this in Europe, but it's also extremely, I would say, detailed in what kind of tech you can use. And there's been already criticisms for even from the national competent authorities to the complexity of it.
Do you have any comments about securities?
Well, you know, when it comes to tokenization, there are also like a bunch of more practical problems that we have to solve. There's like the difference in settlement time. There's kind of liquidity problems. So as much as I'm in favor of tokenizing, the DLT pilot regime makes it possible to tokenize, but it feels like we haven't really solved the why and the how entirely. Cool.
Thank you. And with that, we're at time. So please give a round of applause for our panelists, and thanks a lot for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you.